refine and refine the communications plan. And I don't know what type of exactly the type of motion you're looking for, but to maybe move forward with the requests and then re-examine things in a year, which is kind of the timeline that Jennifer's presented, and then probably tangentially look at having conversations. I don't know if that would occur in this committee or a different committee, but other communications regarding RFPs. But right now, I think we have a more immediate need to get these contracts into place and to really get things fine-tuned. That's the word I was looking for earlier, fine-tuned, on our communications plan moving forward.
Yeah, and I think the motion can be that we're going to support and recommend. We'll support as an outreach committee Jennifer's request, and we will recommend to the DA board that that we are certainly on board with this. So,
yep.
So yep. Thank you for your motion. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Dardis second.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion?
This is Kevin. I just want to point out here that I'm still a little frustrated by this process, and it kind of goes to again to Commissioner Strand's deal. I just don't know to what level. I'm being brutally honest here. I just feel in some ways that we've had some hand-selected companies here. So I'm not going to support this motion.
Okay, thank you.
I do want to point out that it's probably one of the only times I voted no on anything on this diversion project.
Any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Mr. Ebinger.
Yes.
Mr. Gast. Mr. Gast.
Yes.
Mr. Capitan.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
No.
Mr. Steen. Mr. Steen. Mr. Olson.
I'm sorry, what was it, Olson?
Mr. Olson, yes.
Yes.
Ms. Carlson.
Yes.
That is everyone. And we are short one to have 7.
Did I hear my name called, Mr.
Yes, Mr.
Mr. Strand votes?
Yes.
Strand votes yes.
Okay, that is everyone.
Okay, and the motion carries. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go on to the second item under 4. Jennifer or Mr. Paulson?
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. I'll take this. This is a quick item. I just wanted to provide public outreach and get this in the packet. This is an updated FMDA Board of Authority organizational chart. So on here will be the names and contact information for the existing board members as of today. And then on the next slides, I've laid out our executive leadership team. And you can see we are still working on that director of finance role. We hope to get that filled as quick as possible, and we're trying to move forward on that. The next page also shows the key project support members, most of whom are consultants working on the project and leading up specific areas of the program. And they are the individuals and their contact information. So I just want to be able to provide this on a yearly basis, I think, to keep everybody aware of who's doing what and provide that contact information. No need to take any action on anything, more for your information, but certainly could take any questions if there are any.
Commissioner Strand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a minor notation. Some of those emails, at least the Fargo ones, might be old City of Fargo email addresses versus fargoND.gov. They just might need an update.
Oh, thanks for the note, Commissioner Strand. So I was not aware of the change, but we will certainly work with Mr. Redlinger to ensure we have the accurate emails on there. So.
Okay, thanks. Is that it for that?
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
Bear with me.
Sure.
When I look at that list and I see people's personal email addresses, I'm not so sure we shouldn't have boards of directors, members, and others have official email addresses. You know, you, for example, Commissioner Olson, you should have an email address that's formally through the Diversion Authority or through the board, and they're not going to go, somebody's not going to go grab your personal phone and your personal laptop to see what your personal emails were doing in a public capacity.
Oh, that's a very good point. I think that's something we should really look at. I think most of us, am I the only one on that list? Kind of looks like it. I'll work on that, John. Did you have another question? On Shelley, question?
Yep, thank you. I'm just wondering if there should be a placeholder for whoever the next Moorhead City Council member is who will be appointed. Just to have a placeholder because eventually that will happen. We don't have, we are going to need to wait until the council appoints the next council member to make a determination on who will be the other person to represent Moorhead on the board.
Absolutely, Mayor Carlson. I'll add a to be determined box on there.
All right, anything else? If not, next meeting will be March 24th. And I look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Carlson.
All right, thank you. Second?
Jake seconds.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed,
Aye.
same sign, motion carried. All right, thank you everyone for your
Diversion Authority Land Management Committee meeting to order this Wednesday, February 24th, 2021. Don, could you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Sherling,
I am here.
Mayor Peterson, Mr. Grubb,
Here.
Mr. Campbell,
Here.
Mr. Borboom,
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson, Mr. Olson,
here.
Mr. Breitling,
Here.
Ms. Maju,
Present.
Mrs. Preston? Mr. Zimmerman?
Here.
A quorum is present.
Wonderful, thank you. You have before you the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Olson motions.
Thank you, Roger. Is there a second?
Motion second.
Thank you. All those opposed, say aye. And we'll move on to the minutes, item number 3 of our previous meeting, January 27th. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes or a motion to approve?
Olson approves.
Thank you, Roger. Is there a second?
Breitling seconds.
Thank you. All those opposed, say aye. And the motion is carried for the minutes. Let's move on to item number 4, property acquisition status report. Eric, I assume you're going to do that for us?
You bet.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. As usual, in your packet, we have the monthly status report. Front page is consistent with, I guess, all the reports you've seen in the past. I do like to spend some time on page 4 of your packet, which is the overall status map for acquisitions. As you can see, that the channel is primarily green and red, meaning we have acquired everything. Most all of those are voluntary acquisitions. The red colored parcels are those that are acquired via quick take eminent domain. And so we unfortunately have had to do a few of those acquisitions, but nonetheless, we have all the property required for the channel. You can see down in the legend the status counts. So collectively between the green and the red parcels, we're approaching about 600 parcels. So a lot of progress being made there. Of course, a few other big changes that you might notice this month. You can see a lot of the orange colored parcels in the upstream mitigation area. That means that we have initiated the appraisal work there. If you recall, in the last month or so, the Diversion Authority did hire Crown Appraisals to begin the phase 2 flow easement study, which is really an appraisal effort. And so they are working on the appraisal of nearly 500 parcels down there. Some of those are in a negotiation status already as voluntary early sales. So lots of activity being done there in terms of appraisal activity. We are continuing to negotiate on properties for the Drain 27 project, which is in the sort of Camel Hump area of the upstream. We are also continuing to negotiate on lands for the Red River control structure. And then a variety of sort of scattered negotiations throughout the project. So lots of progress being made. And the next page, page 5, just shows a summary of the environmental monitoring easements. We have almost 400 easements to secure for monitoring environmental conditions scattered across the region. Over half of those have already been secured, and we're getting appraisals back on the remaining 160 or so parcels. Those appraisal reports should be approved tomorrow at the Cass County Joint Board and the MCC-JPA Board. And once those appraisals are done, we'll be making offers, working with Jennifer and her team to do some community outreach to all the impacted property owners and kind of have some informational meetings. The remaining pages of this report drill into the next sections. Diversion channel, you can see a budget status there as well. We do have a handful of asset properties that have been acquired. There'll be a lot of discussion here in a minute about the asset land policy. Southern Embankment, continuing to make progress there. The Red River structure, we've got a few parcels yet to acquire, but a lot of them have been acquired. Same thing, I guess, with Southern Embankment, some asset lands that have been in place. And then on the upstream side, again, you can see previously many of these parcels were shaded as a gray shading, and now we've tripped those, excuse me, into an appraisal pending status. And so we are working on the appraisals, not only for structures, but also on the flow easements. So with that, I guess I would stand for any questions if you have any.
Anyone have any questions for Eric? And are we going to make our deadlines, Eric?
We are on pace. We're continuing to work with the Corps as they get their designs done. We're getting ready to start advancing the next pieces of acquisitions. The Corps' design team is working hard. I think they're maybe a little bit behind in a few areas. We're coordinated with them and getting the requests as they come in. So yeah, I feel like we're on pace.
And you have not been coming forward lately to the Cass County Commission with any of these. So I assume you're getting most of these resolved?
We're in a little bit of a pattern right now where the negotiations are ongoing. I'm hopeful that we won't have to come visit the county commission and ask for permission to use quick take eminent domain in the future, but I'm speculating that we'll probably have to come visit you at some time. I'm guessing we won't be able to strike a deal with everyone, but as you've seen in the past, the vast majority of folks, we do reach a voluntary agreement, and I expect that trend to continue.
And when can we expect that you'll be more active on the Minnesota side?
Good question. So on the Minnesota side, we've started doing appraisal work for structures in the upstream area. We have one acquisition that we're going to be presenting to the MIC board tomorrow. There are a few parcels that are impacted by the Red River control structure that we are also working on actively right now. Other than that, we anticipate waiting for the Corps to do their design work of Southern Embankment Reach 4, which is the sort of north-south version segment, and Southern Embankment Reach 5, which is the east-west version. The Corps' design schedule for that is a couple of years away before they anticipate giving us the final real estate request. So I think there'll likely be some ongoing communications, but unfortunately, until we have that design, that kind of leaves some of those property owners in limbo status. So that's something we'll definitely have to do and manage, but don't anticipate any sort of planned acquisition until we get that design over.
Okay, thank you. Well, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think we got the gist of what you said. Really appreciate all the hard work of you and your team, and certainly appreciate the landowners that are cooperating with us in this project. Any other questions from anybody else from the board?
Yeah, Mary, Roger.
Yes, Roger.
Eric, there is the availability of early buyout on the Minnesota side also, if there's landowners or homeowners that are wanting to get out before this process goes, if they're obviously in the staging area, or is that correct?
Yeah, thanks, Roger. That is correct. And that's really why we've started doing the appraisal work for the upstream structures. As we know, there's some people that are frankly sick and tired of being in limbo. And so we've started that appraisal work. There are some property owners who are interested in moving forward, doing a voluntary buyout. And so we'll certainly entertain those. As you've heard me say in the past, we've found that the best time to buy something is when somebody's willing to sell it. So we like to capitalize on those opportunities when they arise.
Okay. Good question. Anyone else have any questions for Eric? Okay. Keep up the good work. Let's move on to item number 5, our policy on the disposition and management of comprehensive project land. This policy was introduced at previous meetings, and The latest draft was emailed to everyone this past week, and we did get some feedback from that. We got some minimal public feedback as well. Appreciate that when the public engages also. I just want to remind you that if you take a look at that draft policy, that the purpose of the project is flood protection. It's certainly not to farmland or own land. And so we address that under the key principles. And item number 4.1 states that the assets, the authority views excess lands as assets of the taxpayers to be used to offset costs of the comprehensive project. So I think that guiding principle is really important as we look forward into approving this policy. Key principle 4.2 says that it's the authority's intent that the sale of excess lands, subject to the preferences that we're setting forth, shall be done via public sale, such that there is transparent and abundant opportunity for all buyers to purchase the property. And then 4.3 is that we'll refrain from selling the land at less than market value. So based on those principles, and after a lot of conversation, Martin has put this policy together with assistance from John Shockley, and they're both here to kind of go over the highlights, and then we'll do a deeper dive into some of the parts of the conversation that have been a little more controversial, and hopefully we'll come to some sort of agreement here so we can move this forward with a recommendation to the Diversion Authority. So with that, Martin and John, do you want to go ahead and?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Madam Chair. I think John was going to have some prefatory comments before we get into the discussion.
Great. Mr. Shockley.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, and thank you, Commissioner Sherling. Yeah, just reinforcing your opening comments. The purpose of the Joint Powers Agreement and the purpose of this policy really is to expedite the sale of excess property. The Diversion Authority really serves as the financial clearinghouse, so to speak, for the project. And so while member entities aren't purchasing the property, it is with diversion funds. And so our intent is that when there is excess property, that the excess property would be sold and the funds returned to the authority to help pay down debt. I know when I was drafting the Joint Powers Agreement and meeting with the different political subdivisions, that was pretty much universal from what I heard from everybody, was that whatever funds you can make off of the sale of property should go back to paying off debt on the project. When Martin and I were working on this, we tried to make a carve out that if a member entity want property, it could purchase the property. The Diversion Authority's sole purpose really is flood control. While economic development and more housing or more structures is great for the project and for the community, it's really, I guess the fundamental thing is that we would rather see the member entities do that, and that's what I think we did. The member entity preference where the land would be offered to the member entity, the member entity could purchase it and then go use it for whatever economic purposes it wanted. And maybe if Martin, if you're ready to start on your presentation.
Sure, thank you, John. I would encourage folks, we're getting a little bit of feedback, so if there's if you're not speaking, could you please mute? I'm going to share my screen and give that a try, but I see Mary Roger has his hand up. I don't know whether he wants to make introductory comments or if it's up for.
Go ahead, Roger.
It was up from my last question, Mary. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so
if I could just say, I'm not sure that I'm able to see when somebody's got their hand up. I'll keep an eye out for it, but if I miss it, please let me know.
Okay. Does everyone see on my screen, it's a split screen, the clean copy and the red line version of the policy is issued?
Are you
Yeah, I
able
see.
to, are you
Yep.
able to make that a little larger or not?
Okay, well, I was going to try this. I'll switch back and forth. I would propose that since this has been through one land committee meeting and has been in the packet, that I not go through a line by line discussion of all of the changes. And I want to also point out that Eric's name wasn't mentioned in the drafting. Eric's been a part of this drafting effort as well. So I will, I'll hit the highlights of, and hopefully, Roger, that you can see a little better there in terms of the size of the document. I'll hit the highlights of the changes that have been made since the last land committee meeting. And then I think there are two primary provisions that John has mentioned that probably will want to have some discussion. So obviously we added some preamble setting the stage that John just reviewed. And there were really two primary changes that were made as a result of some comments in the last meeting. One being the member entity preference, which was in response to some concerns expressed around member entities potentially having different objectives or different policies or procedures with respect to land that might not be consistent with the diversion authority mission as a flood control authority. And I think that's one of those that is likely going to get additional discussion in today's meeting. And the second, I will just point out that will still get, I believe, some discussion today is the adjacent landowner provision, which in your packet you saw that there was a point to potentially change preference to notice, which would modify the intent of providing preference to adjacent land property owners to making sure they were notified and then participated in a process that included others. So I would propose, Madam Chair, that unless there are other red lines, the rest of the red lines were cleanup in language and some provisions that I would consider minor. Perhaps we could just go to comments and questions on the policy and use our time talking about the substantive concerns that anyone has.
Does anyone have any objections to that process? Anything else that we should be bringing up that's glaring that we're not seeing here? We've really vetted this pretty thoroughly, and this is where we've landed.
Martin, could you highlight the area here where, like, the joint board could entertain an exchange when we're trying to work with acquiring land rights from a landowner, and where that falls in the disposal?
So I believe, Commissioner Olson, you're referring to Section 8, which would be impacted owners. And the authority and its member entities can entertain proposals from impacted owners. What this section is intended to allow the authority to do is to trade or exchange properties with impacted owners in order to facilitate mitigating the impacts of the project on that impacted owner.
So, Martin, it says proposals received will be subject to the preferences described herein. I'm just wondering where these impacted owners, at what level are they? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 preference level? Would they be first, or does the
Martin, mind if I take a stab at that, Martin?
Go ahead, Eric.
Sure, thanks, Roger. I guess the intention of putting this in there, Roger, was that I wanted to make sure that our core mission of buying the land necessary for the project remained front and center. And so if we have a property owner that we're trying to buy some land from, for example, that like the Fossies that we just dealt with, they had some land impacted by the channel, and we owned some remnant land right adjacent to their property, and they asked, could we do a little swap and make the swap part of the transaction, so we get what we need, and they're able to acquire the remnant land that's adjacent to the rest of their farming operation. That's the intent of this provision, is we'd like to be able to have the flexibility to work with those impacted property owners to the extent that the member entity believes it is reasonable and consistent with past practices and all of our acquisition efforts. And so I guess that was the intention of putting this in there. If there needs to be some tweaking or whatever, we could certainly do that.
I guess just so I understand that if we at the joint board level are working to negotiate a swap, does it have to pass through any other of the preferences listed above before we're able to do it? Or do we just need to go back to the landowner that has maybe first right of refusal? Or at what point can we actually be comfortable in doing this exchange?
I think, Roger, that's a good clarification to add to the policy. I'm not sure we've spent maybe sufficient time in thinking through how that section 8.1.2 applies. I believe previous discussions were subject to arrangements for when that land was originally acquired. So if you had a right of first refusal, or the primary landowner had provisions in the original acquisition that they had right of first refusal if the authority disposed of that property, I think that was the intent, that be honored. But I don't believe, and John can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe it was the intent of the policy to have all the other preferences that are in this policy apply necessarily to a swap or an exchange.
Martin, that's correct, and we could make a tweak to the language. I think, yeah, it would be a tweak to the language in 8.1.2.
All right, thanks for that.
Good point, Roger. Anyone else?
Mary, Commissioner Campbell has his hand up.
Yes. Okay. Now I can see it. Kevin, please go ahead.
Thank you. I want to go to 8.1.4. The final sale or exchange transaction will be submitted to the authority for approval. I'm thinking from the actions that we take at the MCC JPA, we usually will approve or authorize and approve negotiated contracts. And so that isn't the final say. Because I was under the assumption that once the MCC JPA, for example, on the Minnesota lands, once we make the decision, that's done, and then we submit our bill to the Diversion Authority for reimbursement. I guess I just want to make sure I'm understanding this process.
Yeah, Rod, or Commissioner Campbell, Eric here. The intention here is anytime the MIC board or the joint board want to do a transaction that involves selling or trading of our project land, that transaction, the disposal or essentially exchanging of our project land should get approval from the diversion authority before it's finalized. But if the transaction includes just a payment to the property owner, those transactions happen exclusively at the joint board and the MIC board level. And that's part of the provision from the JPA. I think it's paragraph 1610 that requires any member entity, basically requires the diversion authority to approve sale or exchange of any land.
Okay, I just need that clarification, because I know that once the land is acquired, for example, by the MCC JPA, that title stays in the hands of the MCC JPA, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so in order for the MCC JPA to, get rid of that land in whatever form it might be suggested or requested, then that would require going to the diversion authority for approval.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I know in the future when we're following this process. Yep. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Grubb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since we first started reviewing this, we kind of had the concern of the difference between urban property acquired versus rural or more ag property acquired. And one of the concerns we had, we're using the Park East remnant land example. I think the city has title ownership in that, but of course we took a shot at a public offering for that and rejected the proposals we received. But we were under the impression that we got diversion authority approval to try and dispose of that land, and the proceeds would be passed through to the diversion. Now, and I'm really happy to see a second version of the lands policy, but we had a little bit of concern about the preferences to the previous owner or even the adjacent owner in certain cases that as a city, that may not really be our preference. So Martin, you talked about a potential edit, and maybe you were trying to get at that earlier, but would you mind if I called just who's been having some communications to just see if I captured that correctly?
Bruce, if that was a question for me, you broke up just a bit there during your question.
My apologies. I was going to ask Nathan to help me out if I stated anything incorrectly. Maybe we've fixed that one concern that arose as we were talking about the Park East property, but Nathan, are you on?
Yes, I am, Bruce. Thank you. Well, so I think in some conversations we've had on the city, we're still a little concerned with how it's written, because really the intent of the city is similar to the diversion authorities, that we don't intend to own any of this land long term, and that's where it seems like the preference to the member entities is really probably more geared for member entities that are looking to own land long term. Our intent is to hopefully dispose of this land in relatively short order too, just like diversion authorities' intent is. We're not it's not our role to own this land long term. So that's where it appears as if maybe some of our concerns can be addressed if there is a specific call out for urban lands or lands within the city, that if we removed the preferences in 5.3 and 5.4 to prior property owners and adjacent landowners, and we are able to go right to a market sale with a diversion authority, that it would address our concerns of being able to do that. Because again, we're not looking to own this land. We're looking to put it back in private hands in relatively short order as well. So that's where the first of in 5.2, the preference to the member entities, it doesn't really seem like that should be a necessary step to go forward with selling this excess land. It'd be just an unnecessary step.
Martin, do you want to address that?
Well, I'm not certain I'm the best to try and adjudicate what the concern is, but if the intent of the member entity preference was to basically achieve a mechanism to bypass both of those preferences. So if the member entity did acquire the property, they wouldn't be subject to any diversion authority restrictions or diversion authority policies or procedures regarding that land. So originally, that was the intent, that if a member entity wanted to do something different, whether it be an RFP process or I think if I recall correctly, in the last meeting, we talked about proposals that might involve zoning issues or development considerations, particularly for some of the city parcels. And I've had conversations with Mary and others at the county with respect to potentially retaining some land that might be advantageous for the Benson bypass or other improvements for the county. That would facilitate that process. If it's not adequate to get it done, that's why we're here talking about it. So I'm not sure what, I'm not sure I have a solution in terms of proposed language to fix that problem at the moment. And I think what I'm hearing you say, Nathan, is rather than provide preference to member entities, it would be preferential to basically carve out the requirements for adjacent and prior for those properties. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's, I guess, what I would be proposing, that for lands within an urban setting, that sections 5.3 and 5.4, preferences to prior landowners and adjacent landowners, those steps in the process does not apply to lands within the city.
So would that necessitate the diversion authority, though, to be getting engaged in other kinds of sales that the city might want to entertain?
So, sorry to interrupt, Mary, but I think
you see what I'm saying?
I do, but last meeting I asked a question about an RFP process, and at that time it's communicated that an RFP process is an acceptable way to sell lands. Is that no longer the case?
Well, it certainly could be, but you expressed to me anyway, the way I understood it was that you may have a preference, a development preference as to who you entertain for a purchaser. And by having the policy this way, you know, the city, the county, whoever purchases their property, and then, you know, you could turn it into a park if you wanted to. We'd be out of it. I mean, the DA would be completely out of it. It would give you so much more freedom. Otherwise, the DA would be engaged in that. And, you know, all the DA really needs to do is get their money back. To me, the way Martin has this written, it's pretty, I think it simplifies it, but maybe I'm not seeing it quite right. And if anybody else wants to weigh in, please do.
Well, if I could, Commissioner Shirley.
Certainly.
I think by leaving 5.2, the preference member entities, still in the procedure, that would still give the city an opportunity to buy the land if we decided we did not want to sell that land at some point down the road. You know, I guess the concern we had internally here, if we were to buy the land and then go and sell the land at a later point, the city is taking the risk that the appraisal that was done to determine what that fair market value was could be incorrect. And now we maybe are going to be losing some money when we go to sell this property, you know, in the similar way of trying to sell it for a fair market value. I mean, it's something that this policy has covered within this as well in section 5.5, that if excess land can't be sold for fair market value, then the executive director will make a recommendation to authority to adjust the market value. So that it seems like this policy is acknowledging that if the diversion authority wants to go and sell land at some point and the fair market value that's deemed through some sort of process is incorrect, that they can go and adjust. Well, if the city buys that land at a fair market value, we won't know until months down the road that it was incorrect, and that that value we cannot recoup the amount we had to pay. So now we're asking City of Fargo taxpayers to cover a loss that really seems like it should not be something that is asked of the city. When again, the city is looking to get rid of this land as quick as possible, just like the diversion authority would be.
Commissioner Sherling, perhaps I could.
Yes, Mr. Shockley.
Thank you. I've been thinking a little bit about this particular issue and thinking about why, what is the policy justification for having the preference for the adjacent landowner? And I'll start first with, I think, why it probably makes sense out in the rural areas. And without naming any particular names, there is a parcel of property that was sold many years ago that's along the interstate and hasn't historically had some horses located on it. Very small parcel. Somebody came in and bought that, and it triggered a lot of calls for the Cass County Police Department or Sheriff's Office to do welfare checks on the animals and the people that were located in those buildings and structures. And I think the adjoining property owners didn't really appreciate the structures out there. And so there's that concern may not be present in an urban area. So it may make sense to have a carve out for smaller parcels in the rural areas that you would give preference to the adjoining property owners, so that you would prevent that. Because having grown up in a farm community, if there was a 10-acre parcel that was pretty easy to connect up to your quarter section, you probably would want that rather than having somebody living there. So it probably makes sense to carve that out. You may not have that same concern in an urban area, where giving preference to the adjoining property owners might actually have a negative impact on the market. And so I'm wondering if we don't solve two problems with creating sort of a clarification within the policy that a property that is smaller than X number of acres located outside of the city limits would be subject to the preference for the adjoining property owners, and then any properties within the city would not be subject to that. And then when we went forward with the sale of land in the city, either the cities, then the market would just dictate what the property was sold for rather than having artificial conditions. It's just a thought about how to maybe move forward a little bit on a policy position.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. You kind of entered several different things into the mix. So I think the adjacent landowner question is a separate issue, but I can see where it would fit in here. My question with that one is, what happens? How is the DA board involved then if the city of Fargo has a preference for what they want to do with a particular piece of property, and maybe they don't want to develop it, and the diversion is ready to unload the property? I mean, how does that work within the framework here that Bruce and Nathan are suggesting?
Well, I think if, just once again, this is a heavily policy-driven question, but if there's a desire by the authority, and perhaps the solution is there's a desire by the authority to go ahead and offload the property, the authority would say it's time to sell the property. And if the member entity doesn't want the property, then it would just be sold on the market. I'll use the example in Fargo, that parcel would just be put on the market, and whatever is gotten for the parcel is gotten for the parcel. But if Fargo felt strongly that it wanted to buy the property for an economic development reason or something like that, they could step up and buy the parcel. I don't know if that necessarily solves the problem that Bruce was talking about, but it might be an option.
It sounds like it would be in keeping with what our policy says here, and it would certainly take care of the problem, I think. Does anybody else have a thought on this? Anybody want to weigh in?
Commissioner Sherling, Bob Zimmerman has his hand up.
Yes, Bob, please
Thanks.
go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. First, John said the magic word finding property, but I'm going to throw my. I think in situations where we have smaller parcels.
You're breaking up, Bob, a bit. I don't know if you can speak up more.
I'll get a little closer.
I think those that are not speaking need to be on mute. We're getting a little feedback from somebody. If you're not speaking, I just encourage you to stay on mute.
All right, we'll try it again. I think the situation where we've got smaller, irregular shaped parcels, maybe adjoining the diversion channel or the dam, I think the adjoining property owner preference makes a lot of sense. In fact, we had a program in Moorhead where we did that. So we don't get the situation that John was describing. The situation that pops into my head, though, and I'm throwing this out there for somebody to shoot holes in my theory, but I assume there's going to be situations where we acquire parcels in the upstream mitigation area, take zone 1 where we need flowage easements, and I'll just throw an example out. Maybe there's a structure site on 160 acres, all owned by the same person. Through negotiation for the structure site, we acquire the 160 acre parcel. Obviously, we're not going to keep that. We're going to resell that. But in the vision would be, I think, that it's going to continue to be farmed. Under this policy, only those property owners adjacent to that parcel, or they would get the preference. But maybe there's another farmer a mile and a half down the road that could make the same use of that parcel, but he wouldn't get the preference. Am I misinterpreting the way this is written?
That is correct, Bob. That is how it's written now. And we have gone back and forth on this very issue. This has been a sticky one. Quite frankly, the more we talk about it, the more I like, say 20 acres or whatever the number might be, that would be offered first to adjacent landowners. That would be a possibility. The other thing, the other argument is that you don't offer it to adjacent landowners at all. You've got the 20 acres and you're concerned about the horse thing or the mudding thing or whatever it might be. Well, all the landowners there have the same, ability to step forward and make a bid on that land too. So, we've talked about picking winners and losers here. So, I don't know. I kind of personally like 20 acres, that would be offered first to the adjacent landowner. we've already disrupted people enough in those areas. I think that that might be the way to go, but I would love to hear from other people. And I know Jenny and Bernie and Roger, you know, you've all kind of spoken to this in the past. Kevin, you want to say something?
I do. I just want to make note. I think that Jenny probably may want to comment on this, but she just sent me a text saying that she's having trouble with her connection and she's trying to call in now. So I don't know to the tech people what we can do there, but.
So Mary, Shirley, and Mayor Mahoney here. I think Bob Zimmerman's on. It might be a good question to ask. So where I get confused is the Wiley land. So he owns land right where the Red River project is going to go in. So we basically will have that land purchased. He will not farm it anymore, and it'll be part of the project. There's organic land that is very much close to his land, but there is this land in between before you get to his farmland. So he's not adjacent landowner to necessarily the organic farm property. But when you guys talked about swaps, if we're buying him out, he can no longer farm a 1 acreage. Does he get any preferential because we took some land from him? And if he has a farmer of 1,000 acres, you took 400, he's only got 600. Why would he not get preference on the organic land to replace on these swapping things where you try to keep the farmer whole? So does this policy handle that at all, or would the adjacent landowner to the organic land get the precedent over him and he'd have no choice on it, but yet we're knocking him out as far as acreage?
Well, keep in mind that these swaps are done in order to get the deal put together, and you know, they're compensated, and this is one way of compensating them. But Eric, I think maybe this would be a great question for you to address.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. Several years ago when we were trying to implement Plan A, there were 2 quarter sections of organic farmland that we were asked to buy from a willing seller of the land. And so now for the last several years, we've rented out that organic farmland to the producer who has continued to farm it organically. That land, those 2 quarter sections are not impacted by Plan B. And so we have roughly 300 acres of organic farmland as assets that we need to dispose of at some point. There are other organic producers who are impacted by the project, and coincidentally, they own about 300 acres collectively of impacted land. And so on the surface, we could do some type of swap. But on the other hand, the producer who is farming our land is really the guy who is benefiting from the organic farmland. And so if we just go ahead and sell it, we're sort of kicking him in the shins. And so I've had some discussions with a few of you about how to handle that situation. And the suggestion was it's probably best to just put that organic farmland up on the market. We've had multiple calls from multiple people asking to obtain that. And that's where land swaps get to be really, really complicated. Is I don't want to be in a situation where I'm picking winners and losers, who gets the farmland. I think it's a much safer situation to post it up for sale. Currently, the policy says we would offer to the former owner, and there's a good debate in here about going to the adjacent owners. And so if we're forced to go to the adjacent owners in that situation,